Have you ever wondered what it's like when a teacher has to step up and try to resolve a problem that has escalated quickly? That's exactly what America had to do in the Persian Gulf War. But how did this intervention even happen? Well, to start off, you might ask yourself, what is the Persian Gulf War? The Persian Gulf War was basically a war between Iraq and Kuwait after Iraq lost lots of money and resources during the Iran-Iraq War. But why did Iraq invade Kuwait this time? It's because of money. No, like seriously, Saddam Hussein, who was the leader of Iraq, really thought that invading Kuwait, he could easily get all of the oil reserves, as well as canceling out the debt that Kuwait still owed Iraq because of the Iran and Iraq War. But that aged horribly. First off, Iraq was alone, and secondly, it made Iraq look more of an aggressive approach, which prompted the US to get involved and start a whole military operation to begin with. One of the reasons why America intervened was that Hussein, I think that's how you say it, had allegedly accused George W. Bush for weakening its powers and by making Kuwait to reduce its oil prices. They also threatened Kuwait if they continued to reduce the prices. George later warned Hussein that he'll deeply regret if he ever decides to invade Kuwait. George also adopted a conciliatory, I think how you spell it, policy to moderate his regime and policies, but he didn't take that seriously. So on August 2nd, 1990, Hussein decides to take a risky decision and invade Kuwait. Some of the political and economic causes for the American intervention was that since the Cold War was nearly ending and tensions between the US and the USSR calmed down, this could be used as an opportunity to show other countries what America truly is even after the Cold War ended. However, it did raise concerns for Iraqis' actions in the Middle East. America was also really invested in oil reserves in the Middle East, which is mostly the reason why George decided to intervene. It also significantly influenced the American economy due to oil access and military technology. Even with all of this, America first decided to condemn an Operation Desert Shield, which is an operation basically to prepare and build up troops in Saudi Arabia. This operation lasted from the start of the war to January. After that, America decides to launch an Operation Desert Storm. And you might be wondering, what is that? Operation Desert Storm was the largest air campaign ever since the conflict in Southeast Asia. 500,000 troops were mainly placed in Saudi Arabia as part of the operation. America and 40 other allied nations participated in this campaign. It was so huge that the ground campaign only lasted for about 100 hours before Kuwait became liberated. The effects of these massive operations was that it was a decisive victory for the coalitions, and they started to advance into Iraq's territory. Oh, and speaking of coalitions, let's talk about them. The coalition of forces was a group of countries that came together for a purpose, which is the Operation Desert Storm. It indicated how the world was viewed on Saddam Hussein's action because it made him look more of an aggressive person than ever before, probably even more than the Iran-Iraq War. And because of this, the UN Security Council passed many resolutions in order to try to reduce Iraq's power and military, such as Resolution 660, 661, 663, and many more. This was also around the time where George Bush started forming a coalition of countries to counter Iraq.
Just 2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait. These attacks continue as I speak. Ground forces are not engaged. Tonight, the battle has been joined. Now, the 28 countries with forces in the Gulf area have exhausted all reasonable efforts to reach a peaceful resolution, have no choice but to drive Saddam from Kuwait by force.
Even with all of this success, there are some strengths and weaknesses that the coalition had to suffer throughout the war, especially the Operation Desert Storm. One of the strengths that the coalition had against Iraq is that they're really smart when it comes to military. Now, what do I mean exactly? Well, first, since America has way more allies than Iraq, obviously, they can easily exploit Iraq by their coalition defenses due to their intelligence on using their resources wisely. Unlike Iraq, and they're also smart when deploying their defenses among the lines of Iraq, completely ruining Hussein's actions. However, the weaknesses that the coalition had to suffer was that since the coalition had many members in it, they're obviously going to stop and have some disagreements since they have different political styles, which would slightly delay whatever they were planning to do. After the war ended, several things happened that would negatively impact the Middle East region that would still apply to this day. First off, let's start the major one, the execution of Saddam Hussein. After the war, Saddam Hussein was later executed on December 30th, 2006, and he was sentenced by hanging. After this, it immediately caused instability in the region. Conflicts and wars would dramatically rise, unstable governments and countries, especially the dangerous rise of ISIS. It would even cause this country, Iraq, to have a lack of dominance. All of this just shows how moving one leader can have such a huge impact on the region, and maybe even the entire world. In my opinion, if Saddam Hussein hadn't decided to invade Kuwait for money and oil, then America wouldn't have to start a whole Operation Desert Star, which would cause around 700,000 people participating in the war, which would eventually make other nations to join in and form the coalition that will ruin Hussein's plans, later ending the war sooner than ever, completely executing him and turning the Middle East into a wild.
Is liberated. Iraq's army is defeated. Our military objectives are met. Kuwait is once more in the hands of Kuwaitis in control of their own destiny. We share in their joy, a joy tempered only by our compassion for their ordeal. And soon, we will open wide our arms to welcome back home to America our magnificent fighting forces. It was not only a victory for Kuwait, but a victory for all the coalition partners. This is a victory for the United Nations, for all mankind, for the rule of law, and for what is right.
Do I ever think this war was justified?
No.
Anyways, here are all the resources, and that's it for the video.